The federal courthouse on Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C., stood as an imposing monument to justice, its marble columns and heavy oak doors a symbol of authority. Inside, a courtroom was set for what was supposed to be a routine procedural hearing, a brief review of an alleged violation of media laws under the Federal Communications Act, Section 204. But the atmosphere was anything but routine when Caroline Leavitt, the sharp-tongued White House press secretary and a loyal spokesperson for President Trump, stepped into the room. The air was thick with tension, the silence heavy, as if the walls themselves were watching. Leavitt, known for her poise under pressure, sensed immediately that something was wrong. This was no ordinary hearing. It was a trap, and she was walking straight into its center. Chief Justice John Roberts presided over the bench, his demeanor cold and commanding. Known for strategic rulings that prioritized order over debate, Roberts exuded an aura of unyielding authority. His eyes followed Leavitt as she entered, not as a White House official, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. Without preamble, he delivered a ruling that stunned the room. A $50,000 fine imposed on Leavitt for violating the Federal Communications Act. No evidence was presented, no arguments heard, no process followed, just a blunt declaration, as if the case had been decided long before the doors opened. The courtroom felt like a legal firing squad, with Leavitt expected to bow, accept, and leave in defeat. But Leavitt did not bow. Her hands rested lightly on the table, her documents unopened, her composure unshaken. She rose halfway from her seat and spoke with measured clarity. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we haven't begun. I haven't been allowed to present any arguments." Roberts's eyes narrowed, not in consideration, but in irritation. "Unnecessary," he snapped. "You violated the law. There's nothing to discuss." His tone was icy, deliberate, meant to humiliate. This was no legal misunderstanding. It was a calculated message. Sit down, be silent. Do not challenge this court. Leavitt, however, was not most people. She remained standing, her movements precise, her voice steady. Years of facing media scrutiny and political pressure alongside Trump had honed her ability to wield restraint as a weapon. She took a breath and spoke again, her words cutting through the silence. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I formally request to present my defense. Free speech and due process demand that I be heard." Her voice was firm, unmistakable, carrying the moral weight of an inviolable right. But Roberts did not flinch. He leaned forward, his voice laced with contempt. "Miss Leavitt, this is not your stage. This is my courtroom, and I won't tolerate speeches or delay tactics." The words were a warning, a punishment disguised as procedure, meant to intimidate not just Leavitt, but everyone watching. The courtroom had become a stage for power, not justice. Roberts was not defending the law. He was using the bench as a throne. His refusal to let Leavitt speak, his dismissal of due process, pointed to one truth. He had decided the outcome long before, and nothing she said would change it. This was not about a media law violation. It was about silencing Leavitt, making her an example to warn White House staff, reporters, and Trump supporters in the gallery. Challenge this court, and you will be crushed. Leavitt, however, saw through the script. She stood firm, her mind racing but her demeanor calm. This was a deliberate suppression, not a mistake. She was being fined not for breaking a law, but for who she was. Trump's loyal spokesperson, a voice unbowed by political pressure. Roberts's courtroom was orchestrated to send a message. You don't belong here. He held the gavel, but Leavitt held something stronger: the truth and the weight of public opinion. She pulled documents from her briefcase, the room's atmosphere shifting as she placed them on the table. Each page was meticulously prepared, a weapon she knew how to wield. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "we'll talk about precedent, because what you're doing has been tested and rejected." She held up the first page. Citizens United vs. FEC, 2010. An organization was accused of violating campaign finance laws for political speech. No documents, no verified reports, just vague allegations. The Supreme Court ruled that restricting free speech was unconstitutional, overturning the charges. She paused, letting the words sink in, then continued. The court declared, "Free speech cannot be punished based on assumptions. Due process demands clear evidence." She turned to the next page. Texas vs. Johnson, 1989. An individual was fined for political expression. No physical evidence, just the authority's opinion. The court ruled the punishment violated the First Amendment, and every level of review upheld that decision. She looked up, her eyes locked on Roberts. That ruling was upheld at every level. For the first time, Roberts shifted. His jaw tightened, his shoulders adjusted slightly, but Leavitt noticed. So did others. The court stenographer, Emily Carter, typed with renewed urgency. Prosecutor Michael Harper leaned forward, hands clasped, now more spectator than participant. Leavitt pressed on. "You're fining me $50,000 without requiring evidence, without allowing arguments, without even opening a hearing. No documents, no witnesses, just your pronouncement. With all due respect, Your Honor, that's not justice. That's power imposed under the guise of justice." A wave of unease rippled through the gallery. Reporters exchanged glances, silently asking, "Is she really saying this?" Yes, she was, and she wasn't done. She tapped her documents lightly. "I cite these cases not as theory, but as a binding reminder of what this courtroom stands for. When a judge ignores process, silences the defense, and rules without evidence, they aren't interpreting the law. They're violating it." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, resonating like thunder. "You may ignore my arguments, but you cannot erase precedent, and you will not rewrite the Constitution from that bench." Roberts's jaw tightened further. His eyes darted to the stenographer, then to the prosecution table. His fingers, once calm, began tapping unevenly. He was calculating, tense. Every move he had made relied on control and intimidation, but his foundation was cracking. Leavitt wasn't just defending herself. She was dismantling his authority with the precision of a surgeon, citing Supreme Court rulings he couldn't dismiss without undermining the judicial system he claimed to uphold. Roberts broke the silence abruptly. "The court will take a 15-minute recess." He stood, offering no explanation, no acknowledgement. It was an escape disguised as procedure. As he vanished into his chambers, his judicial robe trailing like a shield, the courtroom remained frozen, unsure whether it was allowed to breathe. Leavitt stood still, hands resting on her documents, scanning the room. She saw what Roberts feared: doubt creeping into the cracks of his authority, spreading through every spectator who had witnessed a Chief Justice falter. When Roberts returned, he was not alone. Behind him was Judge Samuel Coleman, a tall, seasoned figure whose black robe carried the weight of decades on the federal bench. The room shifted instantly. whispers of unease running through the gallery. Coleman's presence signaled that the case had spiraled beyond control. Roberts's voice was stripped of its earlier dominance. For the record, I have asked Judge Coleman to observe and, if necessary, provide guidance on certain procedural issues. It was a carefully crafted statement, but everyone heard the truth. Roberts was losing control and needed someone with greater gravitas to steady the ship. Leavitt stood calm, but every sense was on high alert. She knew Coleman's reputation, a razor-sharp intellect, relentless in cross-examination, able to command a courtroom with a glance. That glance now settled on her, not hostile but sharp, assessing her every move. Leavitt met his gaze, holding it a second longer than necessary, her presence solid as stone. This was no longer just a courtroom, it was a battlefield between entrenched power and reform. Coleman spoke, his voice even but forceful. Miss Leavitt, you've raised constitutional concerns regarding the application of the Federal Communications Act, Section 204. Restate your core argument for the record. It was a test, and Leavitt knew it. She responded without hesitation. Yes, Your Honor. I'll begin with the violations of due process supported by Supreme Court precedent. Her voice declared that the rules had changed. The power had shifted, and Roberts knew it. The court called investigator Andrew Baxter to the stand. His gray suit was pristine, his Federal Communications Commission badge gleaming. He walked with the assurance of a man unchallenged for 2 decades. Leavitt watched him with calm precision. Baxter avoided her gaze, reciting the oath and sitting with hands clasped, waiting as if the outcome was predetermined. Leavitt took 3 slow steps toward the witness stand, letting the weight of her approach settle over the room. Mr. Baxter, she began, her voice calm, you filed the complaint leading to the fine against me, correct? He nodded. That's correct, ma'am. She continued. Did you take photographs to document this violation? Baxter shook his head. No, ma'am. Wasn't necessary. Her voice chilled the room. Did you write a detailed report? Any diagrams, sworn witness statements, or time-stamped footage? Baxter shrugged slightly. None of that was needed. Leavitt pressed. Was anyone else present at the time of the alleged violation? Baxter's reply was curt. I was there alone. She paused for a second, then turned toward the gallery and the bench. So, let me get this straight. You filed a complaint leading to a $50,000 fine based entirely on your personal judgment, with no photographs, no report, no third-party verification, and no supporting documentation whatsoever. Baxter's voice tinged with irritation. That's right. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I know what a violation looks like. Leavitt's faint smile was restrained, calculated. I'm sure you do, Mr. Baxter, she said, her voice soft but sharp as steel. But we're not here to debate your feelings. We're here to talk about evidence. Baxter shifted, a crack in his confidence. She stepped closer. Do you believe your personal opinion, unsupported by evidence, is enough to override a citizen's right to a fair hearing in a federal court? Baxter's eyebrows furrowed. I believe my experience allows me to make sound judgments. Leavitt repeated, Judgments? But what about fines, penalties, legally binding consequences under the Constitution? She turned to the bench. Your Honors, what we have here isn't law enforcement. It's assumption, not process, but imposition. Mr. Baxter didn't observe a crime. He interpreted an action and treated his interpretation as law. Baxter admitted under oath that his complaint rested on subjective judgment, not evidence. Leavitt let the silence speak, then delivered the line that cracked the courtroom open. "What you call a complaint, Mr. Baxter, is really just your opinion in a suit, a fine dressed up in the veneer of personal conviction." Judge Samuel Coleman leaned back, his gaze pensive. Roberts stared down, lips pursed. The prosecution's case was hollow, and Leavitt had exposed it with surgical finesse. She turned to the bench, her voice lowering. "This isn't about Mr. Baxter personally. It's about the standard we accept in a courtroom. If a fine can be imposed without evidence, every citizen is one arbitrary ruling away from financial ruin. What Mr. Baxter calls enforcement, the Constitution calls tyranny." Leavitt then told the stories of ordinary citizens crushed by similar abuses of power. James Carter, a veteran in Boise, Idaho, lost his auto shop due to a clerical error. Maria Delgado, an electrician in Raleigh, North Carolina, had her career derailed by vague licensing changes. William Hayes, a retired trucker in Flagstaff, Arizona, was fined over $12,000 for a minor property boundary violation. These were not numbers. They were scars, proof that the system, when unchecked, became a predator. She looked at Coleman, her voice rising with conviction. "Let's stop pretending this is just a hearing about a minor fine. What happened to James Carter, Maria Delgado, and William Hayes wasn't an accident. It was unchecked power, a system that can destroy lives without proving anything." She raised her hand, palm open. "No evidence, no documents, no witnesses, just the opinion of an investigator in a courtroom ready to rubber stamp without question. That's how injustice survives. It wears the mask of formal procedure and waits for no one to challenge it." Her final line left the courtroom on the edge of a precipice. Power that answers to no one doesn't protect people. It hunts them quietly, slowly, until one day it knocks on your door, and there's no one left to stand in its way. The silence that followed was suffocating. Roberts's fingers twitched on the bench. He spoke, his voice hollow. "This court retains discretionary authority. That authority is not up for debate. But it was a desperate attempt to reclaim power, rooted in ego, not law." Leavitt let his words hang in the silence, then stepped forward. "Your Honor, discretionary authority does not mean judicial supremacy. The power of that bench exists only within the boundaries of the law. Discretion is not a shield for error or a sword for bias. It's a tool to be wielded carefully, never in place of evidence or truth." Her voice hardened. "This fine was imposed with no documents, no witnesses, based on an unverified claim. You call it enforcement, but it's assumption. A $50,000 fine based on a feeling. That's not discretion. That's lawlessness cloaked in a judicial robe." Before Roberts could retort, Coleman leaned forward. "I've heard enough. Miss Leavitt is correct. Discretionary authority cannot override constitutional standards. It cannot substitute truth with assumption." He continued, "In this case, we have no supporting documents, no corroborating witnesses, and no substantive evidence to justify the fine. This court cannot uphold a fine based on personal interpretation." Roberts sat motionless, hands clasped tightly. His authority had been dismantled in his own courtroom. Finally, Roberts spoke, his voice strained. "This court finds insufficient evidence to sustain the fine. The fine is vacated. The charge is dismissed." It was not a triumph, but an admission of defeat. an overreach by a system that nearly crushed someone who refused to yield. Leavitt stood calm, composed, as if the dismissal was inevitable. She had forced the system to bend to the truth. The courtroom sank into profound stillness. Roberts, once unchallenged, now sat motionless. His power evaporated in the face of Leavitt's relentless demand for due process. He met her gaze and whispered, almost defeated, "I underestimated you." Leavitt's subtle smile was not triumph but confirmation. "You're not the first, Your Honor." The room's dynamic shifted irreversibly. The weight of unchallenged power lifted, replaced by a new awareness that justice demands accountability. Leavitt turned from the bench, her steps measured, her heels clicking like the pulse of a revolution. The gallery watched in silent awe as she passed, realizing they hadn't just witnessed a legal ruling, but a transformation in the system. Beyond the courthouse doors, her footsteps echoed, reaching far beyond a single trial. The daylight flooding through the entrance felt symbolic, piercing the fog of hidden corruption. As Leavitt stepped outside, bathed in gentle light, the victory was complex, not celebrated with cheers, but carved into the annals of the courtroom, shaping every future case where power threatens justice. The injustice Leavitt faced was not unique, but systemic, rooted in a culture of unchecked authority. By standing firm, she paved the way for change. Her actions reminded the system that the law is not a tool of oppression, but a shield for the people. Every detail of the day, Robert's cold tone, the stifling tension, the gallery's held breath, became sparks for a broader movement. Judges might now pause before issuing rulings without due process. Prosecutors might find themselves challenged by the precedents they once dismissed. Citizens who felt the sting of arbitrary power now had a beacon of hope. In the weeks that followed, the reverberations reached far beyond the courthouse. Legal journals cited the case as a pivotal moment in administrative law, a stark example of how unchecked power can be dismantled by a resolute voice. Law schools discussed it as a turning point in judicial discretion, and attorneys recounted the day as the moment due process was defended with conviction. For Leavitt, the victory was personal, not just about vacating a fine, but about reclaiming dignity eroded by systemic bias. Her journey didn't end there. Other battles awaited, but she had proved something essential. Even the most entrenched power can be challenged. The law is not an inviolable decree, but a living promise to protect the vulnerable. As the courthouse doors closed, the echo of her stance lingered, a reminder that when power goes unchecked, it becomes a weapon. But when questioned, it can be harnessed to uplift and protect. Leavitt's case became a focal point nationwide. Federal administrative offices faced demands to review similar complaints and fines. Her victory sparked a movement for transparency and justice, starting in a small Midwestern city where a local attorney uncovered hundreds of arbitrary fines. City by city, officials were forced to examine enforcement practices long shrouded in secrecy. The findings were shocking. Thousands of citizens financially ruined by fines lacking documentation or objective standards. Public outrage erupted, and the narrative shifted from isolated incidents to a reckoning with administrative overreach. Leavitt's meticulously argued case was cited by scholars and activists as a turning point. Federal agencies and local governments began reviewing records, vacating hundreds of fines imposed without evidence. Community organizations mobilized, demanding stricter guidelines for evidence-based enforcement. The momentum was powerful, amplifying voices once silenced by bureaucratic indifference. Public forums erupted in protests, with citizens demanding transparency and guarantees against arbitrary rulings. The media amplified the story. Television networks, newspapers, and platforms like X buzzed with coverage. Major news programs reported on audits documenting how cities grappled with the fallout of a flawed system. Tens of thousands of fines, imposed over decades, were revealed as unjust. Each story made it clear the issue was systemic, demanding urgent reform. Pressure mounted on officials to justify and change flawed processes. For Leavitt, the impact was profound. She didn't just defend her rights, she laid a cornerstone in American justice. Her case became a historic precedent, a reminder that the law must be grounded in evidence, transparency, and fairness. Law schools incorporated her arguments into curricula, teaching the importance of fighting for due process. Policymakers cited her case to overhaul outdated practices. Communities found hope in the reforms sparked by her victory, with each vacated fine and revised policy shaping a fairer system. Leavitt's legacy was not in loud proclamations, but in the daily lives of citizens no longer fearing arbitrary punishment. Her courage inspired a movement to scrutinize and reform a system tainted by unverified complaints. She altered the course of history, ensuring every penalty is grounded in evidence and enforced fairly. Her story became a rallying cry for those who felt powerless, a symbol that questioning authority and demanding due process can change the world. The fight against systemic injustice remains long and challenging, but Leavitt's legacy shines as a reminder that even the smallest voice can reshape a nation. Her journey reflects real-world issues Americans face: administrative overreach and a lack of transparency. Her story offers a lesson. Don't be afraid to demand evidence when facing an administrative decision. By researching rights through government websites or legal aid organizations, citizens can demand transparency. Leavitt's legacy movement on social media shows the power of community in amplifying voices, encouraging people to join forums to share experiences and demand reform. By connecting with those affected by injustice, as Leavitt did with the stories of James Carter, Maria Delgado, and William Hayes, individuals can drive systemic change. Stay resolute, seek the truth, and unite. That's how each person can contribute to a fairer America. Caroline Leavitt didn't just reclaim her dignity. She reignited a flame to guide those who believe the law must serve the people, not the other way around.